Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. I suppose the whole thing began on one of those evenings when the world feels smaller than usual, when the air carries that odd mix of quiet and possibility. I was standing in my bedroom, tugging nervously on the hem of a silk robe I'd bought online months earlier, but never truly intended to wear outside the privacy of four walls. It was soft, far softer than I felt I deserved, and it shimmered faintly each time I breathed. At my age, 57, trying on something like that felt like sneaking into a version of myself I didn't yet have permission to be. I had no plans to be seen. That's the rule I'd kept for years. Try things quietly, privately, cautiously, and always with the blinds shut. But that evening, half distracted by the robe itself, I forgot about the window behind me. My hands trembled as I fastened the sash, knowing even as I did it that this impulse came from somewhere deeper than whim. Something in me, for the first time in decades, wanted to see who I could be if I stopped pretending I didn't want change. The robe settled across my shoulders like it belonged there, and I remember looking at my reflection, not with shame, but with a strange ache of recognition. I whispered something to myself, something like, "Finally." That's when I heard the soft knock on the glass. A sound so delicate I almost mistook it for wind. I turned. There, framed by the evening light and the narrow rectangle of her own kitchen window across the yard, stood my neighbor, Evelyn. She was older than me by a handful of years, elegant in the casual way some people learn after surviving many storms. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look amused either. She simply raised a hand, not quite a wave, more a gesture that said, "I see you." My heart thudded so loudly I felt it in my palms. I stepped back, almost stumbled. The curtain swung closed and the room dimmed, but the moment stayed bright in my mind, sharper than it had any right to be. Had she truly seen me? Or had the light played tricks? I paced the room, pulse racing, the robe swishing against my legs. I felt exposed in a way I had never allowed myself to be, not because she had caught me wearing it, but because for the first time, someone might have seen me wanting something different than the role I'd played for years. And the strangest part, the part one didn't expect, was that her eyes, just for that instant, hadn't looked judgmental. They had looked knowing, kind, almost relieved. Still, fear won out. I loosened the sash and hung the robe carefully back in the closet, as though handling something fragile and incriminating. I told myself the moment would pass, that she'd pretend she hadn't seen anything, that tomorrow morning we'd exchange the same polite nods we always did while bringing in the mail. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and pretending the world hadn't tilted a little, I knew the truth. Something had been set in motion. Something I wasn't ready for, yet had been waiting for my entire adult life without admitting it. And Evelyn, my quiet, observant, maddeningly perceptive neighbor, was somehow at the center of it. The following morning arrived heavy with unease, the kind that settles behind the ribs and refuses to move. I lingered by the kitchen window longer than I needed to, pretending to fuss with the kettle while my eyes drifted toward Evelyn's house. Her curtains were open, sunlight spilling across her windowsill plants, but she was nowhere in sight. I told myself that was good. Easier. Cleaner. If she hadn't seen anything, nothing would change. And if she had, well, maybe she'd decided to politely erase the memory. People our age understand the value of mutual discretion. But as I took my first sip of tea, a soft knock rattled my front door. I don't know why my heart jolted the way it did, like I'd been caught doing something illicit. When I opened the door, Evelyn stood there, dressed in a light cardigan and carrying a small container of lemon shortbread cookies. It was such an ordinary gesture that, for a moment, I wondered if the previous night had simply been my imagination. "Morning," she said warmly. "Thought you might appreciate a little something. I baked last night, and made too many." I stepped aside, still trying to read her expression. "Of course. Please come in." She walked past me, her steps confident yet never intrusive, as though she could sense my inner turbulence, but wouldn't touch it without permission. She set the container on the counter, then folded her hands and turned to me with a look that made my breath snag. I hope you'll forgive me if I speak plainly, she said. Last night, I caught a glimpse of you. Just a glimpse. And I wanted to make sure you were all right. Heat bloomed across my face. Part embarrassment, part terror, part something I didn't have the courage to name yet. You did see, I whispered. I wasn't sure. Oh, I saw, she replied, but her voice held no malice, no mockery. Only clarity. But what struck me wasn't what you were wearing. It was the way you looked at yourself. I swallowed hard. And how was that? Like someone who finally gave themselves permission to breathe. Her words nearly undid me. My hands tightened around my mug, and I stared down into the tea as though answers might gather at the bottom. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled. I didn't mean for anyone to see. I'm still figuring things out. I know, she said softly. Most people assume that once you reach a certain age, you're meant to stop discovering new parts of yourself. But the truth is, that's when the real discoveries begin. She gently touched my forearm, grounding me, not pushing, not prying, just standing there in shared humanity. Then she surprised me again. I host gatherings sometimes, she continued. Small, comfortable evenings with friends who enjoy fashion, creativity, storytelling. Nothing rowdy, nothing unkind. People showing who they are in whatever form that takes. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. If you ever wanted a safe place to explore, I'd be honored to welcome you. The idea should have terrified me. Maybe it did. But beneath the fear was something else, an ember of hope. A possibility I'd long buried under routine and silence. I didn't give her an answer. Couldn't. Not yet. She didn't press. Instead, she left me with the cookies, a quiet smile, and a soft parting phrase that lingered long after the door closed behind her. It's never too late to become the person you've always known you were. I stood there in the stillness of my living room, holding her words like a fragile but precious gift, aware that the next choice I made would shape everything that followed. For the rest of that day, Evelyn's words followed me through every quiet corner of my home. They trailed me from room to room, brushing my shoulders like the whisper of fabric I'd hurried back into the closet. I kept trying to distract myself, sorting mail, wiping down countertops that didn't need wiping, reheating lunch I never ended up eating. None of it worked. My mind kept circling the same question: what would it mean to accept her offer? By late afternoon, the house felt stifling. I stepped into the backyard, hands shoved deep in my pockets, staring across the fence. Evelyn's garden looked serene as always, lavender bushes trimmed neatly, a small wind chime spinning lazily in the breeze. She watered her flowers at almost the same time every day, but today she wasn't outside. I shouldn't have expected her to be. She'd already done enough. Still, I found myself walking inside, up the stairs, and into my bedroom. The robe hung where I'd left it, shimmering gently when I opened the closet door. It felt like an invitation. No, more like a question that had been waiting patiently for years. My fingers brushed the fabric before I realized what I was doing. Something inside me shifted, a tiny, almost imperceptible click of alignment. Not confidence yet, but the faintest hint of readiness. I slipped the robe off the hanger and draped it over my arm, feeling its weight, its promise. My reflection stared back from the dresser mirror. Same face, same lines of age and worry, same familiar uncertainty. But behind all that, a softness had returned to my expression, the same softness from the night before. I didn't try it on. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed holding it, the way one might hold a letter they've read a dozen times but aren't sure how to respond to. I thought about Evelyn, how steady her voice had been, how she hadn't tried to define me or categorize me, how she created space without crowding it. Most people offer advice wrapped in their own fears, but she had offered possibility wrapped in respect. And at this stage of life, when so many relationships become transactional or polite to the point of hollowness, her sincerity shook something loose inside me. Evening came slowly. A soft orange glow slipped across the room as the sun lowered, landing directly on the robe in my lap. The moment felt significant enough that I couldn't ignore it any longer. So I stood, hung the robe back up with care, and made my way downstairs. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I didn't know what I planned to say until she answered. Hello. Evelyn's voice carried its familiar warm steadiness. I exhaled shakily. It's me. I wanted to thank you again for earlier. You don't owe me thanks, she said gently. Only honesty. That's all I ever ask. There was a long pause on my end, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of something high and deciding whether to step forward. I think, I said finally, that I'd like to hear more about your gatherings. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. Of course. How about you come over for tea tomorrow afternoon? No pressure. Just conversation. That sounds nice. The words came out softer than I intended. Then it settled. I'll put the kettle on it too. After we hung up, I stood there holding the silent phone, heart pounding with a strange new mixture of fear and anticipation. It dawned on me that tomorrow wouldn't just be tea. It would be a turning point, a small one, maybe, but pivotal all the same. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in months. The next day, I woke with an odd steadiness in my chest. Not confidence exactly, but something adjacent to it, like the calm that arrives after you've already made the difficult choice, even if you don't yet know its consequences. I dressed simply, choosing a sweater I'd always liked but rarely wore, and spent far too long deciding whether to bring something with me. Flowers? A tin of tea? A polite excuse? In the end, I settled on nothing but myself, because Evelyn had made it clear that was all she expected. At 2:05, I stepped out my back door and crossed the small path between our houses. Her porch looked inviting, with a faded welcome mat and a pot of marigolds arranged neatly beside the steps. Before I had a chance to knock, the door opened and there she stood, as though she had been waiting just on the other side. Right on time, she said, smiling. I felt my shoulders relax in a way I hadn't realized they were tense. I didn't want to keep you waiting. You couldn't if you tried. Come in. Her living room was warm and lived in, filled with small personal touches, family photos arranged on a mantel, a quilt draped across the sofa, books stacked in gentle disorder beside a rocking chair. Nothing about the space felt intimidating. It felt like an invitation to exhale. She motioned toward a chair by the window. Sit anywhere you like. The tea is nearly ready. I sat, hands folded in my lap, eyes drifting across the room. On the far wall hung a framed photograph of what looked like a small gathering, people of varying ages dressed in colorful outfits, smiling, laughing, radiating comfort in their own skin. I wondered if they were the very people she'd mentioned. Evelyn returned carrying a tray with 2 cups, a pot of tea, and small butter biscuits. She poured with the easy grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times, then settled into the chair across from me. I'm glad you came, she began. I wasn't sure if my invitation yesterday might have been too forward. It wasn't, I said quickly. I just needed time to think. Of course you did. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. When someone begins to explore a new layer of themselves later in life, it isn't a decision made lightly, but it can be one made beautifully. I inhaled slowly, letting her words land before asking the question that had been pressing at me all morning. These gatherings you host, what exactly happens at them? Her face lit with a mixture of fondness and practicality. Well, they're evenings where friends, some old, some new, can express themselves through clothing, storytelling, or simply conversation. We celebrate creativity, authenticity, the kind of selfhood that often gets tucked away as people age. Sometimes folks wear outfits they've always wanted to try. Sometimes they share memories or hopes. Sometimes they just sit and appreciate the freedom of the space. She paused, meeting my eyes gently. There is no judgment, and no expectation, only encouragement. A tightness I'd been holding in my chest eased. And you think I could be part of that? I don't just think you could, she replied. I think you might discover more joy there than you expect. I let out a breath that felt like releasing years of hesitation. I've spent most of my life trying not to draw attention, I admitted. Trying to fit the mold others assumed I belonged to. I'm not even sure what I want yet. That's the perfect place to begin, she said. Wanting certainty before stepping forward is how people keep themselves stuck. Curiosity is enough. The conversation drifted then, effortlessly, naturally, into stories from her past, anecdotes of people who had found courage in small but meaningful ways. She spoke about a retired teacher who always wanted to try theatrical costumes, about a widower who discovered comfort in bright scarves, about friends who simply longed to be seen without explanations or disclaimers. As she spoke, I started to imagine myself among them, not as a spectacle, not as a stranger to myself, but as someone quietly unfolding into a truer shape. Evelyn set her cup down. "There's a gathering this Saturday," she said gently. "You're welcome to attend. Only if you want to." My breath caught. Saturday. So soon, yet somehow not soon enough. Part of me recoiled instinctively, clinging to the familiar fear of being seen. But another part, small, brave, steady, leaned toward possibility. "I think I'd like to come," I murmured, surprised by my own answer. Evelyn's smile grew warm and proud, but never overwhelming. "Then we'll make it a night you'll remember." Something fluttered in my chest, not panic, not dread, but something startlingly close to hope. The days leading up to Saturday seemed to stretch and compress in strange ways. At times, the anticipation made every hour feel slow and deliberate, like I was wading through warm molasses. Other moments flickered by in a rush of nerves and second-guessing. I found myself pausing mid-task, folding laundry, reading the paper, trimming the hedge, only to feel a swell of uncertainty rise inside me. What if I made a fool of myself? What if I disappointed Evelyn? And perhaps most frightening of all, what if I discovered something about myself I couldn't ignore anymore? By Friday evening, I stood in my bedroom facing the closet again. The robe hung there, quiet and patient. I touched the sleeve, feeling the smoothness beneath my fingertips. I still didn't know if I would wear it on Saturday, but I recognized something important. The robe no longer represented fear. It represented possibility. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. "Don't overthink tomorrow. Bring yourself as you are. Everything else can be figured out together." I smiled despite the knot in my stomach. She had a way of speaking directly to the worry, without calling it out by name. Saturday arrived with a crisp breeze, the kind that carries subtle hints of change. All morning, I paced and fussed, brewing tea I never drank, rehearsing and discarding imaginary conversations. By midday, I realized none of it was helping. I sat on the edge of the bed, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe long enough to quiet the noise in my mind. A soft knock startled me. I opened the door to find Evelyn standing there with a gentle smile and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "Thought I might come check on you," she said. "Sometimes waiting alone can make the hours feel heavier than they are." I stepped aside, grateful beyond words. "You read my mind." "Only because I've been there myself," she replied, setting the bag on the bed. "May I?" I nodded, and she reached into the bag, pulling out a few carefully folded garments. Not bold or flashy, but soft, elegant, thoughtful pieces. Things that felt like they were chosen with care, not drama. A smooth satin slip in a muted rose color. A light shawl with embroidered edges. A delicate set of gloves that looked more decorative than practical. She laid them out gently, almost ceremonially. "I thought you might want options," she said quietly. "Not instructions. Just possibilities." Emotions swelled unexpectedly in my throat. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just tell me how you feel when you look at them." I took a step closer, fingers hovering above the fabrics, without yet touching. Each piece whispered a different version of myself, none forced, all sincere. The rose slip made my breath hitch slightly, simple, graceful, something that felt like it belonged to a life lived with gentleness rather than fear. I began, then stopped, searching for a word that had eluded me for decades. "I feel invited, not pushed." Evelyn's smile softened. "That's exactly the intention." We spent the next hour together, not choosing an outfit so much as choosing a direction. I tried on the shawl, slipping it over my shoulders with a tentative slow movement, and saw myself reflected in the mirror with new eyes. Not transformed yet, but shifting, opening. My posture straightened almost unconsciously, not with pride, not with vanity, but with recognition. "You're seeing yourself," Evelyn murmured from behind me. "Truly seeing yourself." I swallowed, forcing down an unexpected wave of emotion. "It feels strange, but not wrong." "Strange is good," she replied. "Strange means you're no longer hiding." By the time evening approached, the nerves hadn't disappeared, but they had changed flavor. They were no longer sharp and paralyzing. They had melted into something closer to anticipation. The kind of flutter one feels when stepping into a new chapter rather than running from an old one. Evelyn stood by the door, her keys in hand. "Ready to leave when you are," she said. "We can walk together." I looked once more at the mirror, at the person I was still getting used to seeing, and realized something important. I wasn't walking toward a performance. I was walking toward honesty. "I think," I said softly, "that I'm ready." And Evelyn, with the quiet dignity of someone who understood precisely how much courage that sentence required, simply nodded. "Then let's go." We walked to Evelyn's house under the soft blue-gray glow of early evening, the kind of light that seems to blur the edges of things and make the world feel gentler than it usually is. I kept my hands clasped in front of me, not out of fear, but to keep them steady. The shawl she'd loaned me fluttered slightly each time the breeze passed by, brushing my arms with a calming lightness. Evelyn didn't say much during the walk. She didn't need to. Her quiet presence beside me felt like a steady hand on the small of my back, guiding but not pushing. I could sense she was letting me gather my own courage in my own time. When we reached her front door, muted music drifted out, soft jazz, comforting and warm. A hum of conversation followed, low and soothing, like a river flowing on the other side of a curtain. My stomach clenched for a moment, and I halted on the step. Evelyn turned to me, her expression patient. "Take a breath," she said. "Look at me." I did, and she nodded gently. "Every person inside that room has felt what you're feeling right now. Every single one. You're not arriving as an outsider. You're arriving as someone who belongs." Her words steadied me in a way nothing else could have. She opened the door, and a soft wave of warm light spilled onto the porch. I stepped inside behind her. The room held maybe a dozen people, some older than me, some younger, some dressed elegantly, others casually, some in attire that hinted at their own quiet transformations. Yet every face carried a softness, an ease, as though the air itself encouraged authenticity. A tall man with silver-streaked hair and a velvet jacket greeted us first. "Evelyn," he said warmly, then turned to me with genuine curiosity. "And who is your dear guest?" Evelyn placed a hand lightly at my back. "A friend who's exploring some new things," she said. "Be gentle." He chuckled. "Aren't we always?" Then he offered me a polite nod. "Welcome. Please, make yourself comfortable." As more people approached to introduce themselves, I noticed something unexpected. No one asked intrusive questions. No one stared too long. They simply offered their names, their smiles, and their acceptance. And I realized how starved I'd been for that kind of space, where introductions came without assumptions, without expectations. After a while, Evelyn guided me toward a quieter corner near a display of softly lit photographs. Each photo showed people wearing outfits that radiated personality, some whimsical, some elegant, some bold. Yet none felt theatrical. They felt like small windows into lives lived more truthfully. "These are from previous gatherings," she explained. "Moments where people began stepping into themselves." I studied them closely. The smiles weren't exaggerated. They weren't the forced sort captured at family holidays or office events. They were gentle, private smiles, smiles that looked like they were meant for the wearers themselves rather than the camera. I realized my breathing had steadied. My shoulders had loosened. The shawl on my arms no longer felt like a costume. It felt like a choice. A woman with soft curls approached, her dress a calming shade of lavender. "I love your shawl," she said with a kind, measured voice. "It suits you beautifully." Her compliment startled me. Not because of what she said, but because of how it made me feel. Seen, but not exposed. Affirmed, but not scrutinized. Thank you, I managed, feeling warmth bloom in my chest. You look comfortable, she said. That's what matters most here. I paused, letting the words sink in. Comfortable. It wasn't a word I'd ever associated with self-expression. But tonight, for the first time, it felt attainable. Evelyn touched my elbow lightly. How are you feeling? I turned to her, realizing the answer came more easily than I expected. Like I've stepped into a room I should have walked into a long time ago. Her smile deepened. Not triumphant, not proud in a possessive way, but gently relieved. That's all I hoped for. The music shifted then, something slower and warm. People gathered near the center of the room to talk, laugh, share stories. I watched them, realizing they didn't move with performance or pretense. They moved with freedom. And I stood there, in a soft shawl that wasn't mine, among people I'd just met, feeling something I had spent decades believing might never belong to me. Possibility. As the evening deepened, conversations wove together like threads in a comforting tapestry. I found myself drifting gently from group to group, listening more than speaking, absorbing stories of late-in-life discoveries that felt startlingly familiar. A retired nurse who'd always loved the elegance of vintage fashion but never let herself wear it until a year ago. A former accountant who collected embroidered scarves in secret for decades before finally wearing one to a gathering like this. A widower rediscovering joy through soft colors and textured fabrics he used to admire quietly but never touch. Each story felt like a lantern being lit in a dark hallway I'd walked for years without knowing where the doors were. I didn't notice how much time had passed until I felt Evelyn's presence beside me again. She wasn't hovering, she never did, but standing just close enough to let me know she was there, that this moment wasn't something I had to navigate alone. You're doing beautifully, she said softly, her voice low enough that it felt like it belonged only to the space between us. I looked down at my hands, which no longer trembled. I thought I'd feel more out of place. And do you? No, I admitted slowly. I feel understood, even by people who don't know anything about me. That's the magic of shared vulnerability, she said. It removes the need for explanations. She motioned toward a low table near the back wall where a few pieces of clothing lay displayed not as costumes, but as artwork. Hints of silk, lace, soft fabrics, elegant lines. Not revealing, not provocative, but expressive. Human. These, she continued, are items people offer for others to try if they're curious. No obligation. No expectations. Just an opportunity to feel something new. I felt my breath catch, the flutter of nerves returning. Gentle this time, not overwhelming. Are they meant for tonight? For tonight, or for later, or not at all, she said. What matters is whether something speaks to you. I stepped closer. One item in particular drew my attention, a pale ivory piece with delicate stitching along the edges, a simple, elegant bit of lingerie, the kind designed for beauty rather than spectacle. It wasn't bold. It wasn't flashy. It was honest. Soft. Something that carried dignity and quiet confidence. The moment I saw it, something inside me shifted again, a near-silent recognition, like finding a memory you didn't know you'd lost. Evelyn watched with that familiar, patient steadiness. You don't have to try anything tonight, she said, but if you want to, there's a small powder room off the hallway. Private. Safe. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because the desire itself felt fragile, like something that needed to be held carefully. I'm not sure how I'll feel, I said quietly. That's part of the discovery. She lifted the ivory piece and placed it gently in my hands. There's no right or wrong reaction, only your reaction. The fabric was lighter than I expected, cool at first, then warm as my hands closed around it. Something about holding it grounded me. It wasn't about who might see me. It wasn't about earning approval. It was about allowing myself a moment of truth. I looked at Evelyn. Will you wait for me? Always, she said. And something about the simplicity of her answer strengthened me in a way nothing else had that night. I walked toward the hallway, each step quiet but certain. The door to the small powder room was slightly ajar, the light inside warm and inviting. My heart thudded faintly, not in fear, but in awareness of the significance of what I was about to do. I closed the door behind me, stood before the mirror, and let the silence settle. The ivory fabric rested in my hands like a promise I had finally stopped running from. Then, with slow, deliberate care, I began to change, into not a different person, but a truer version of the one I had always been becoming. The powder room was small, but the light was soft and forgiving, the kind that doesn't sharpen edges or amplify flaws. It felt like a sanctuary tucked aside for moments exactly like this. Quiet revelations made in private, the kind that change a person without fanfare. I stood before the mirror, the ivory piece resting across my palms, and for a long moment, I simply breathed. I recalled standing in front of other mirrors throughout my life, morning mirrors, workday mirrors, hurried mirrors, mirrors that reflected a person who knew how to blend in, how to play expected roles with practiced ease. But this mirror, tonight, felt different. It wasn't asking me to justify myself. It wasn't asking me who I thought I was. It was asking very simply, who are you becoming? The question steadied me. With slow, deliberate movements, I slipped into the ivory garment. The fabric brushed my skin like a sigh, gentle, warm, surprising in its ability to feel both new and somehow familiar. I didn't look in the mirror right away.
I wanted to feel before I saw.
I wanted to honor the moment without rushing to judge it. And what I felt wasn't shame, or fear, or even excitement. It was alignment, like stepping into a space inside myself I had ignored for years because I believed I wasn't allowed to enter it. When I finally raised my eyes to the mirror, the reflection surprised me. Not because I looked transformed, but because I looked honest. My shoulders had softened. My expression, tentative but certain, held a gentleness I hadn't seen in myself since youth. The garment didn't disguise me. It revealed me. A knock sounded softly on the door. "Take your time," Evelyn's voice murmured, patient and unhurried. "No one is expecting anything." I swallowed a tightness in my throat. "I'm all right," I said. And I was. More than all right. I took one more look at myself before gently draping the shawl over my shoulders again, allowing its softness to settle around me. No part of me wanted to hide. But some parts still needed time, and that was okay. Self-discovery at this stage of life wasn't about rushing into a new persona. It was about allowing truth to unfold at its own pace. When I stepped out into the hallway, the soft music and gentle conversation drifted toward me like an embrace. Evelyn was waiting just a few steps away, leaning lightly against the wall. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment I realized she could see everything, my nerves, my relief, the quiet fire beginning to glow inside me, and she welcomed all of it. "How do you feel?" she asked. I exhaled, the answer coming easily. "Like I've stopped pretending." She nodded, her smile warm and full of understanding. "That's a powerful beginning." We walked back toward the main room together. Nobody turned to stare. Nobody reacted with surprise or curiosity. They simply continued their conversations, their laughter, their gentle exchanges, creating a space where my newness didn't make me an outsider. It made me part of the tapestry. A few people noticed the ivory garment beneath my shawl and offered soft, encouraging smiles. Not approval, not that charged, expectant sort, but recognition. The kind exchanged silently among people who have walked similar paths. A man named Michael, whom I'd spoken to earlier, approached with sincere warmth. "You look comfortable," he said, echoing words I'd heard once already that evening, yet somehow they carried new weight now. "Comfort looks good on you." I felt myself shy at the compliment, but not shrink. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Thank you," I said. "It feels right." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on my arm, not guiding, just accompanying. "Why don't we sit?" she suggested. We moved toward a pair of chairs near the fireplace, where the glow added another layer of warmth to the room. As we sat, she turned slightly toward me, studying my posture, my breath, my quiet composure. "You're glowing," she said, and though the words felt almost too tender, They weren't spoken lightly. Not because of what you're wearing, but because you've allowed yourself to feel something true. I felt my throat tighten again. I don't know what this means for me yet, I admitted. I don't know what comes next. You don't have to. She folded her hands softly. Discovery isn't about planning. It's about listening to the parts of yourself you used to silence. I let her words settle, warming me like the fire nearby. Around us, conversation continued in gentle waves, full of life and comfort. Laughter sparked occasionally, but nothing felt loud or intrusive. This wasn't a party. It was a gathering of souls unburdened by pretense. And as I sat there, wrapped in a shawl that had once belonged to someone else, wearing a garment that felt quietly revolutionary to me, I understood something profoundly simple. I wasn't hiding anymore. For the first time in a very long time, I felt present. In my body, in my heart, in my truth. As the evening carried on, an unexpected calm began to settle around me. Not the fragile, tentative calm that comes from trying to hold yourself together, but the sturdy kind, the kind that arrives when you finally stop fighting who you are. I sat beside Evelyn, watching the room move with an ease I had long believed was reserved for other people. People who understood themselves. People who didn't spend half their lives tiptoeing around unspoken truths. Yet here I was, feeling something I never imagined I'd feel at this stage of life. Belonging. A gentle melody drifted from the speakers, an old jazz tune I recognized but couldn't name. It carried a softness that filled the room with a slow, rhythmic warmth. A few people began to sway subtly where they stood, not dancing, not performing, just moving the way their bodies invited them to move. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing the music to settle into the quiet spaces inside me. "You look peaceful," Evelyn said, breaking into my thoughts. "I feel peaceful," I admitted, a hint of wonder in my voice. "I don't remember the last time I felt that way." She smiled. "Often peace doesn't come from stillness. It comes from truth." I turned toward her. "Did you go through something like this? A moment like tonight?" "Oh, yes," she said, leaning back in her chair. At 51. My life looked perfectly tidy on the outside. But inside, I felt like I was living on the edge of myself rather than at the center. It took me years to realize I didn't need permission from the world to change. I only needed kindness. Toward myself and from the people around me. I considered that. "You make it sound simple." "It wasn't," she replied. "But it was worthwhile." A few guests drifted over to share a story or compliment, each interaction gentle and grounding. One woman offered me a cup of warm cider. Another asked if I'd be coming to future gatherings. A quiet man with soft eyes told me he was proud of me, despite not knowing me beyond tonight. Their kindness didn't feel performative. It felt earned by the simple act of stepping into myself. After a while, Evelyn rose from her chair. "Walk with me," she said. We moved toward the hallway, where softer lighting glowed along the walls. I realized we were heading toward a room I hadn't noticed earlier. A small parlor with a long mirror framed in wood, an antique piece polished smooth by time and stories. "This," she said, "is where many of us take a moment to reflect, literally and figuratively. A quiet space to look at ourselves without the noise of the world." I stepped inside with her. The room was silent except for the muffled sound of music drifting from the main area. The mirror reflected both of us, side by side. I stood tall, the ivory garment visible beneath the shawl, my expression steady, my breathing even. "That," Evelyn whispered, nodding toward the reflection, "is someone in the middle of becoming. Someone who's shedding years of caution." I studied the person in the mirror as though meeting them for the first time. They looked older, yes, lines at the eyes, a softened jaw, but those details no longer felt like flaws. They felt like evidence of having lived long enough to finally choose truth. "It's strange," I said. "I keep expecting to feel silly or scared, but instead I just feel right." "Because you are," Evelyn said softly. "There's no wrongness here, only unfolding." I let my hand rest lightly on the shawl at my shoulder, feeling its warmth, its softness, its invitation. "I didn't realize how heavy it was to hide all these years," I admitted. Not from others, from myself. Evelyn nodded slowly. Most of us don't realize the weight until we set it down. We stood in silence for a moment, looking at ourselves, not with scrutiny, but with quiet recognition. Then I turned to her. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me when I didn't even know what I needed to be seen." She placed a gentle hand over mine. "I didn't see something new. I saw something true. And I'm glad you're finally seeing it too." A soft warmth bloomed in my chest, gratitude, relief, and something even deeper, connection. Not just to Evelyn, but to myself. As we stepped back into the main room, the music had softened, the lights dimmed slightly, and the evening was shifting toward its final, lingering moments. Yet I felt no urgency, no fear of return to the outside world, because something inside me had shifted permanently. And for the first time, I was ready to carry that change with me. The evening wound down gently, as though the house itself knew to lower its voice. Conversations grew softer, laughter warmer, movements slower and more deliberate. People began to gather their things, offering lingering hugs and whispered well wishes, promises to see one another soon, reminders that they were all part of something larger than themselves. I watched these small rituals unfold and felt, with surprising clarity, that I was witnessing a life I'd stepped into, not merely visited. A life that didn't ask me to explain myself, justify myself, or shrink myself. A life textured with color, with softness, with honesty. Evelyn approached again, her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, a serene tiredness in her eyes, the kind that comes from hosting something meaningful. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I let out a slow breath, realizing I wasn't searching for the right answer. Different. Not finished, but a lighter. That's the first sign of real change. She nodded, satisfied. "Come help me in the kitchen?" We walked together into the quiet warmth of the kitchen where the remnants of the evening still lingered, half-empty platters, a vase of flowers slightly askew, little signs of a gathering well-lived. Even here, in the simple act of tidying, I felt that same grounded contentment. As we rinsed dishes and folded napkins, we moved in an easy rhythm, as though we'd been doing this for years. "You know," she said after a moment, "when I first saw you through that window, I wasn't surprised." I paused, looking up. "You weren't." "No," she said, stacking plates with casual grace. "I've lived long enough to know when someone is carrying a truth they're not ready to hold. You had the look of someone who'd spent years being careful, when what you needed was permission to feel curious." I felt a quiet flush rise in my cheeks. Not embarrassment, just recognition. I didn't expect any of this. "Most of us never do," she said. "But that's the beauty of later life transformation. It arrives when the noise of old expectations finally grows quiet enough for your own voice to be heard." We continued to clean in companionable silence until everything looked gently restored. Then she leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "I want you to know something," she said. "Tonight wasn't a test. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even a beginning. It was simply a moment, a real one. And those moments, when you allow them, tend to lead you exactly where you need to go." I nodded slowly. "I don't know what comes next." "You don't need to," she replied. "Just don't go back to hiding from yourself. If you feel comfortable, come to the next gathering. If not, come for tea. Or ask me for help when the doubts return. I know the path. I've walked it." Her words settled in me with the weight of a promise. When the last guest had left, and the house had grown quiet, she walked me to the door. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from her garden. I paused on the threshold, feeling the softness of the ivory garment beneath my clothes, a reassuring presence against my skin. "Evelyn," I said, turning back to her. "Thank you for seeing me, for inviting me, for everything." She reached out, gently squeezing my hand. "Thank yourself, too. You were the one brave enough to step through the door." I held her gaze, feeling the truth of that settle warmly inside me. As I walked home, the streets were empty, lit only by the soft glow of porch lamps and distant stars. My reflection appeared in a few windows as I passed, And each time I saw not the uncertain person I'd been earlier, but someone in the middle of transformation. Not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. Earned. I let my fingertips brush the edge of the shawl, still draped around my shoulders from the gathering. It felt like a gift I hadn't expected, a small piece of courage I could carry with me. When I reached my house, I didn't rush inside. I paused by the window, the one Evelyn had first looked through, and instead of pulling the curtains tight, I opened them. Fully.
Wide.
As though inviting the world, or at least myself, to witness whatever might come next. In that quiet, gentle moment, I realized something simple and profound. I had spent so many years trying not to be seen that I had never learned how to step into my own light. But tonight, under the soft glow of the street lamp, I felt ready. Not to be someone new, but to be myself, with honesty, with tenderness, and with a kind of courage that only comes to those who discover who they are later in life, when fear finally loses its grip and truth becomes something you can hold gently in your hands. And for the first time in a very long time, I walked inside my home feeling whole.